Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that might make your skin crawl just a little before it lulls you to sleep. We're diving into the terrifying monsters of ancient history, the creatures that haunted civilizations long before our modern nightmares took shape. These aren't just Greek legends tonight. We're casting our net wider, across deserts and jungles, through forgotten temples and buried cities, meeting the beasts that made entire empires tremble. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world, possibly while lying awake wondering what lurks in the shadows. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow. Let the weight of the day dissolve like morning mist over ancient stones. Tonight we're not in one place, not in one time. We're drifting through the collective nightmares of humanity, through the monsters that every civilization, in its own way, conjured from the darkness. Let us begin in Mesopotamia, in the land between two rivers, where civilization itself was born. And with civilization came stories. Stories of what lurked beyond the city walls, beneath the waters, in the spaces where torchlight couldn't reach. The Mesopotamians, those ancient Sumerians and Babylonians and Assyrians, they didn't just fear the dark, they populated it. They gave it names, faces, appetites, and one of the most terrifying was Humbaba, guardian of the cedar forest. Imagine a creature so fearsome that even the mightiest heroes hesitated. Humbaba was no simple beast. He was appointed by the god Enlil himself to protect the sacred cedar trees, those towering giants that the gods cherished above all earthly things. His face, the texts tell us, was made of coiled intestines, a grotesque mask of living flesh that shifted and writhed. His breath was fire, his roar was flood, his voice was death itself. When the hero Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, decided to make a name for himself by cutting down the sacred cedars, he knew he'd have to face Humbaba. The journey alone was treacherous, but the real terror waited at the forest's heart. There, among the ancient trees, Humbaba dwelled. Not sleeping, never sleeping, always watching with eyes that could see for leagues in every direction. The texts describe the battle in visceral detail. Humbaba's roars shook the mountains. The ground split beneath his feet. He wore 7 cloaks of terror, each one a layer of divine protection, each one stripping the courage from any mortal who dared approach. Gilgamesh and his companion Enkidu fought for days, and only with divine intervention did they finally strike the creature down. But here's what haunts the story. As Humbaba lay dying, he cursed them. He promised that Enkidu would die young, that Gilgamesh would know no peace. And he was right. The monster's death didn't bring glory. It brought only grief. Because in Mesopotamian thought, some guardians exist for a reason. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Humbaba represented something primal, the terror of the untamed wild, of sacred spaces that punish trespassers, of nature itself as a hostile, watchful force. He wasn't evil in the way we might imagine. He was duty made flesh, protection given claws and flame. Let your mind drift now, across deserts and centuries to ancient Egypt, where the Nile flows like a vein through golden sands. The Egyptians, masters of the afterlife, builders of pyramids, understood that death was not the end. But they also understood that the journey beyond was fraught with dangers. Enter Amit, the devourer of the dead. She waited in the Hall of Two Truths, where every soul was judged after death. Picture her now, a creature assembled from humanity's deepest fears. The head of a crocodile, powerful jaws lined with teeth designed to crush bone. The torso of a lion, all muscle and predatory grace, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus, that deceptively gentle-looking beast that was, in truth, one of the most dangerous animals in ancient Egypt. Amit didn't hunt. She didn't stalk. She simply waited beneath the scales of judgment. When a soul stood before Osiris, god of the underworld, its heart would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the feather of truth. If the heart was heavy with sin, with lies, with cruelty, it would tip the scales, and Amit would devour it. This wasn't just death. It was the second death, the final death, the complete annihilation of the soul. No afterlife, no field of reeds, No reunion with loved ones, just nothing, eternal nothing. The Egyptians feared this more than any earthly pain, more than disease or battle or drowning. To be eaten by Amit was to cease existing in every possible way. What makes Amit particularly terrifying is her patience. She never grew tired, never lost interest, never looked away. Every soul that entered that hall faced her hungry gaze. And she was not cruel, not in the way monsters usually are. She was justice. Cold, absolute, unavoidable justice. She didn't care who you'd been in life, what titles you'd held, what temples you'd built. She cared only about the weight of your heart. The ancient Egyptians lived their entire lives with Amit in mind. Every action, every choice, every word was measured against that eventual reckoning. Be kind, they told themselves, not just because it's right, but because the devourer waits, and she is always, always hungry. Now, let us drift eastward, to the vast expanse of India, where civilizations rose along great rivers and gods walked in forms both beautiful and terrible. Here, in the Hindu epics, in the Mahabharata and the Puranas, we find creatures that blur the line between demon and divine. Consider the Rakshasas, shape-shifting demons of phenomenal power. They weren't mindless beasts. No, that would be simpler, easier to understand. Rakshasas were intelligent, cunning, capable of tremendous cruelty but also of strange codes of honour. They could appear as beautiful humans, luring travellers into false security, or they could manifest in their true forms, towering beings with fangs like daggers, skin dark as storm clouds, eyes that burned with inhuman hunger. The most famous Rakshasa was Ravana, the 10-headed demon king of Lanka. He was learned, a scholar of the Vedas, a devotee of Shiva. He had performed such severe penances that he'd won boons from the gods themselves, and yet he was also a monster, a kidnapper of Sita, an enemy of Dharma, a being whose pride led him to war with the avatar of Vishnu himself. What made Rakshasas terrifying wasn't just their strength, it was their unpredictability. They could be found anywhere, haunting crossroads at midnight, lurking in forests, infiltrating cities in disguise. They fed on human flesh, yes, but they also delighted in corruption, in turning good souls toward darkness, in breaking apart families and kingdoms through deception and fear. Ancient travellers in India knew to be wary at dusk, that liminal time when the boundary between worlds grew thin. They knew not to wander alone, not to trust beautiful strangers who appeared from nowhere, not to eat food offered by those whose eyes didn't quite catch the light correctly. Because a Rakshasa could be anyone, anywhere, and you wouldn't know until it was far too late. Let the image fade now. Let your thoughts drift like smoke on a gentle wind, across the Pacific, to the dense jungles and towering pyramids of Mesoamerica, where the Maya and the Aztecs built empires and worshipped gods who demanded blood. In the darkness of the Mesoamerican night something stirred. The Cipactli, the great primordial monster, part crocodile, part fish, part something that defied description. According to Aztec creation myths, Cipactli existed before the world itself, swimming in the dark void, an endless hunger without formal purpose. The gods, in their wisdom, or perhaps desperation, decided to create the earth from Cipactli's body. But the creature wouldn't die easily. It fought, thrashed, screamed as the gods tore it apart. They used its scales to make mountains, its blood to fill the oceans, its bones to form the framework of existence itself. And even then, even torn to pieces and scattered across creation, Cipactli remained hungry. The Aztecs believed that earthquakes were Cipactli trying to reassemble itself, trying to return to wholeness. Every tremor was the monster's rage, its desperate attempt to undo creation and return the world to the primordial darkness from which it came. And to keep it satisfied, to keep it from rising, blood was necessary. Not just any blood, human blood, the most precious offering. This is why the Aztecs practiced human sacrifice on such a scale that horrified the Spanish conquistadors. It wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake, it was cosmic necessity. They believed, genuinely believed, that without regular offerings, Cipactli would wake fully, and if it did, the world would end. Not metaphorically, literally. The earth would dissolve back into hungry chaos, and humanity would be devoured by the very ground beneath their feet. Imagine living with that knowledge. Every day you walk on the bones of a monster that wants to eat you. Every earthquake is a reminder that something vast and terrible writhes beneath your feet. Every sunset might be the last if the gods aren't properly fed. Now, let us travel north, to the frozen reaches where the Norse carved their kingdoms from ice and stone. Here, where winter could kill as easily as any blade, the monsters reflected the harsh landscape. Jörmungandr, the world serpent, child of Loki and the giantess Angerboda. When the serpent was young, Odin cast it into the ocean, hoping to be rid of the problem, but Jörmungandr grew, and grew, and grew, until it encircled the entire world, so vast that it could bite its own tail. The Norse believed that Jörmungandr lay at the bottom of the sea, wrapped around Midgard like a living horizon. Sailors feared it, not just because of its size, but because of what it represented. The boundary, the edge, the thing that contained their world but could at any moment decide to squeeze. There are stories of Thor encountering the serpent. Once, disguised during a fishing trip, he used an ox head as bait and actually hooked Jörmungandr. The serpent rose from the depths, and for a moment god and monster locked eyes. The sea boiled, the sky darkened. Thor raised his hammer, ready to strike. But his companion, terrified beyond reason, cut the line. Jörmungandr sank back into the abyss, but this was only a delay. The Norse knew, with the certainty of prophecy, that Thor and Jörmungandr would meet again at Ragnarok, the end of all things. In that final battle, Thor would kill the serpent, and the serpent's poison would kill Thor. Both would fall, and the world would burn. What makes Jörmungandr so deeply unsettling isn't its size or strength. It's the inevitability. The Norse didn't believe they could prevent Ragnarok. They knew their world would end. They knew the serpent would rise. They knew their gods would die. And still they lived, fought, built, sang. They faced their doom with eyes open, because what else could they do? Let the cold fade. Let warmth return to your limbs. We drift now across the Mediterranean to the islands and coasts where ancient peoples told stories of creatures that haunted the deep places, the Scylla. We've met her before in Greek myth, but let's linger on what she truly was. Not just a monster, but a tragedy given teeth. In her earliest forms she was simply a hazard, a creature of the straits, a thing that took sailors because that's what she was made to do. But later poets, particularly Ovid, gave her a backstory soaked in sorrow. She was a beautiful nymph once, lovely enough to catch the eye of the sea god Glaucus. But Glaucus loved another, or perhaps Scylla rejected him. The stories vary. Either way, the sorceress Circe, in jealousy or spite, poisoned the pool where Scylla bathed. When the nymph stepped into the water, she transformed. Her legs became tentacles. Dogs erupted from her waist, snarling and snapping with minds of their own. Her beauty became horror. Imagine that moment. Imagine being yourself one instant, and the next feeling your body rebel, change, twist into something that would make children scream and sailors pray. She fled to the cliffs, to the narrow strait, and there she stayed. Not by choice, but because she had nowhere else to go. And the dogs, those 6 heads on long necks, each with 3 rows of teeth, they were always hungry. They lunged at passing ships without her control, sometimes without her knowledge. She became a prisoner in her own body, a mind trapped in a monstrous form, watching herself kill, unable to stop. Every sailor she took, every scream that echoed across the water, was a reminder of what she'd lost. She was punishment personified, but she was also, in a strange way, a victim herself. And that makes her far more terrifying than any simple beast, because it suggests that monstrosity isn't always chosen. Sometimes it's inflicted. Sometimes you wake up one day and find yourself capable of horrors you never imagined, and there's no way back. Breathe slowly now. Let the tension ease from your shoulders. We're moving through Africa to the southern reaches, where the oldest human stories were first told around fires under stars that seemed close enough to touch. The Tokoloshe, a creature from Zulu and Xhosa tradition. Small, often invisible, a trickster spirit that could bring illness, bad luck, or worse. The Tokoloshe was summoned by witches, sent to torment enemies, to steal sleep, to plant nightmares in the minds of the innocent. It was said to enter homes at night, creeping low to the ground, passing under doors like smoke. Once inside, it would sit on your chest, pressing down, making breathing difficult, turning dreams into waking nightmares. Some people, to protect themselves, raised their beds on bricks, believing the Tokoloshi couldn't climb. Others left offerings, small bribes to keep it satisfied and moving on to the next house. What makes the Tokoloshi particularly unnerving is its pettiness. It doesn't want to destroy the world or devour souls. It just wants to make your life miserable. It hides your keys. It spoils your milk. It makes children cry for no reason. It's malevolence on a human scale, which somehow makes it feel more real, more present, than any world-ending serpent or cosmic devourer. People in southern Africa still speak of the Tokoloshi today, sometimes with humour, sometimes with genuine unease. Because unlike ancient myths safely confined to the past, the Tokoloshi exists in living tradition. It's not a monster that was defeated by a hero centuries ago. It's a monster that might, even now, be crouching outside your window. Let us drift west now, across the Atlantic to the dense rainforests of South America, where the Amazon River winds like a serpent through green infinity, and the indigenous peoples told stories of creatures that lurked in the shadows beneath the canopy. The Mapinguari, a creature from Brazilian folklore, particularly from the Amazon basin, is described as towering, covered in thick red fur that arrows and spears cannot pierce. It walks on two legs but moves with the power of something far stronger than human. Its mouth, some say, is in its belly, a gaping maw that smells of rot and death. Others claim it has two mouths, one where you'd expect and another in its torso, so it can attack from any angle. The Mapinguari is said to be virtually indestructible. Bullets bounce off its hide, blades snap against its fur, and it hunts, not just for food, but with a kind of territorial fury, killing anything that enters its domain and leaving the bodies torn and scattered as warnings. Indigenous hunters speak of the creature in hushed tones, describing a scream that echoes through the forest, a sound like a man in agony mixed with something bestial and wrong. When you hear that scream, they say you run. You don't look back. You don't try to be brave. Because the Mapinguari doesn't chase for sport, it chases to kill. Interestingly, some cryptozoologists believe the Mapinguari legends might be based on racial memory of giant ground sloths, massive creatures that went extinct thousands of years ago, but might have coexisted with early human inhabitants of South America. Whether the stories preserve some genetic memory of actual encounters or whether they're pure myth, the terror remains. Because the Amazon, even today, is vast, largely unexplored, full of places where humans don't go. And in those places, people believe, the old creatures still live. Not fossils, not legends, but living, breathing, hunting things that remember when the world belonged to them. Now let your thoughts grow lighter, drifting like leaves on a slow river, eastward again, to the islands of Japan, where monsters took forms both beautiful and strange. The Oni, demons of Japanese folklore, are not quite devils and not quite gods. They're somewhere in between, powerful beings with red or blue skin, wild hair, sharp horns, and tusks like a boar. They carry massive iron clubs called kanabo and delight in causing chaos, punishment, and terror. But Oni weren't always evil. Some served as agents of divine justice, punishing the wicked in hell. Others were simply spirits of nature, forces that humans had to appease or avoid. The line between monster and deity was never quite clear in Shinto tradition. The Oni embodied that ambiguity. They could be cunning, setting traps for travellers, leading people astray in the mountains until they died of exposure or starvation. They could be brutal, smashing down village gates and carrying off victims to their mountain lairs. And they could be strangely honourable, following codes of combat, offering challenges that could be won through cleverness or courage. One famous tale tells of Shuten Doji, an especially powerful Oni who commanded a gang of demons from Mount O. He terrorized Kyoto, kidnapping young women and spreading fear. A warrior named Minamoto no Yorimitsu, along with his retainers, disguised themselves as monks and infiltrated the Oni's fortress. They offered him poisoned sake, and when Shuten Doji was weakened, they struck, beheading him in his own hall. But even in death, Shuten Doji remained fearsome. His severed head flew through the air trying to bite Yorimitsu even as it was separated from his body. Only through divine protection did the hero survive. The Oni's skull became a treasure, a reminder that even monsters could be defeated, though the cost was always high. The Japanese understood that monsters weren't just external threats, they were also internal, reflections of human vice, anger, jealousy, greed twisted into physical form. When you looked at an Oni, you might see not just a demon, but a warning about what you yourself could become. Let the image dissolve, let your muscles go slack, your breathing deepen. We're travelling to the edges of the known world, to the places marked on medieval maps with the words, "Here be dragons." Dragons? Every culture has them. Every continent tells stories of serpents, of winged reptiles, of creatures that breathe fire or poison or storm. But let's focus on the European dragon, the medieval terror that knights spent their careers hunting. Unlike Eastern dragons, which were often wise and benevolent, European dragons were monsters pure and simple. They hoarded gold and treasures, not because they needed wealth, but because they were greed-made flesh. They burned villages not from malice, but from nature. Fire was simply what they did, like birds sing or wolves howl. Beowulf, the great Anglo-Saxon poem, ends not with glory, but with tragedy. The hero, old now, faces a dragon that has been awakened by a stolen cup. The dragon is fury and flame, a creature so ancient that it remembers when the world was younger. Beowulf defeats it, but only just, and only at the cost of his own life. Even in victory the dragon wins because its treasure remains cursed, its hoard poisoned by centuries of greed. Medieval writers describe dragons with remarkable consistency. Huge, scaled, winged, with breath that could melt armour and eyes that gleamed with cold intelligence. They weren't stupid beasts. They were patient, calculating, aware of their power. They didn't just attack. They waited, watched, struck when their prey was most vulnerable. St. George, in his most famous legend, faced a dragon that had been terrorising a kingdom, demanding daily sacrifices of sheep and eventually of human children. The king had run out of volunteers. His own daughter was next. George arrived, confronted the beast, wounded it with his lance, and then led it back to the city like a dog on a leash, demonstrating that faith could triumph over fear. But the older, darker versions of dragon stories don't end so cleanly. Often the dragon is killed, but so is the hero. Often the treasure remains unclaimed, because everyone who touches it falls to misfortune. The dragon, in medieval thought, wasn't just a monster. It was a symbol of everything wrong with the world: greed, violence, chaos, and even when defeated its shadow lingered. The night is growing late now. Your eyelids are heavy. But there's one more creature we must meet, one final monster that haunted the ancient world in ways both strange and terrifying. The manticore, a creature from Persian mythology, adopted enthusiastically by Greek and Roman writers. It had the body of a lion, rust-red and powerful, the face of a man, bearded and sometimes handsome, the tail of a scorpion tipped with venomous spines that it could fling like darts, and 3 rows of teeth in its jaws, shark-like, designed not just to kill but to consume completely, bones and all. Travellers in ancient Persia spoke of the manticore in hushed voices. It was said to lurk in wild places, mimicking human voices to lure victims close. You might hear your friend calling from the darkness, hear your name spoken in a familiar voice, and only when you stepped forward would you realise your mistake. The last thing you'd see would be those too many teeth, that impossible smile, and then nothing. Because the manticore left no remains. It devoured everything, every scrap, leaving behind only silence. What made the manticore particularly unsettling was its intelligence. This wasn't a mindless predator. It thought, planned, learned. Some accounts say it could speak human languages, that it enjoyed conversation with its prey before killing them, a kind of psychological torture that elevated it beyond mere beast into something far more sinister. Aristotle himself wrote of the manticore, treating it as a real animal, something that might be encountered in the far reaches of the known world. Medieval bestiaries included it among lions and elephants and other creatures considered factual. For centuries people believed it was out there, somewhere beyond civilization's edge, waiting. The manticore represents something primal in human fear, the predator that looks almost like us, that uses our own nature, our curiosity, our trust, against us. It's the stranger with a friendly smile who means you harm. It's the voice in the dark that sounds like home but leads to death. It's the reminder that in the ancient world you could never quite be certain what was real and what wasn't, what was safe and what would eat you whole. Now let all these images fade. Let them dissolve like mist in morning light. The monsters are sleeping again, back in their stories, their tombs, their distant places. You're here, safe, warm, far from cedar forests and dark waters and caves where ancient things stir. These creatures, all of them, served a purpose. They weren't just frightening tales told to scare children into obedience. They were ways of understanding the world, of giving form to formless fears. Ancient peoples faced very real dangers: drought, famine, disease, war, wild animals, the unknown. And so they created monsters, gave those dangers names, shapes, stories. It made the terror manageable. If you could name it, describe it, tell stories about heroes who defeated it, then maybe, just maybe, you could survive it too. But there's something else. These monsters, for all their horror, are also strangely beautiful. They're testaments to human imagination, to the creativity that's always existed alongside fear. Our ancestors, sitting around fires 10,000 years ago, weren't content with simple explanations. They built myths, entire cosmologies of terror and wonder. They made the universe vast and populated and meaningful. The monsters aren't just scary, they're magnificent. Humbaba with his intestine face, Amit with her patient hunger, Scylla trapped in her tragic form, Jörmungandr wrapped around the world, the manticore with its impossible smile. Each one is a work of art, a piece of the human story, a reminder that we've always looked into the darkness and seen shapes moving there. And here's the final comfort. We survived them. Not individually, of course. The specific people who first told these stories are long gone. But we, as humans, as a species, we survived every monster we ever imagined. We survived the floods and the demons and the dragons. We built cities where cedar forest once stood. We mapped the world until there were no more edges where serpents could hide. We turned on lights and the shadows fled. The monsters exist now only as stories. And stories, no matter how terrifying, can't hurt you. They can only make you feel, make you think, make you remember that being human means being afraid sometimes, and facing that fear anyway. So rest now. Let the monsters fade into the velvet darkness behind your eyes. Let your breathing slow until it matches the rhythm of the earth itself, ancient and patient and unmoved by anything that walks upon it. The Tokoloshi isn't under your bed. Chipaktli isn't waking beneath the soil. The world serpent sleeps undisturbed in his cold ocean. You're safe. The night is quiet. And the only monsters here are made of words, and words can be closed like a book, set aside until morning. Sleep now, deeply and without fear. Let the ancient terrors guard your dreams rather than disturb them. Because in the end, they're not here to hurt you. They never were. They're here to remind you that humans have always been afraid, and humans have always kept going anyway. Close your eyes. Let the darkness be gentle. Let the monsters rest. And so should you.